I grew up in a house where silence carried more weight than words. My earliest memories are of looking at other children holding their father's hands, while I held no one's. My father was never a part of my life, and that absence became a wound that never closed. It wasn't just about not having someone to call Papa. It was the empty chair at school functions, the unspoken questions in neighbors' eyes, and the way my family carried the shadow of his absence like a stain they never let me forget. At home, I was constantly reminded that something in me was incomplete. My relatives and even my own family would throw sharp words at me, disguised as concern but soaked in criticism. "You have no direction," they'd say. "Look at your cousins, they are doing so well. What are you even capable of?" Each sentence chipped away at me until I began to believe them. I wanted to scream, I didn't choose this life, I didn't choose to grow up without a father. But instead, I swallowed my words and carried the burden quietly. I learned to live with the ache of being unwanted. At school, I tried to disappear into books, pretending the stories were my reality. I used to imagine a life where someone would care if I was late, someone who would ask how my day was, someone who would see me as more than just a responsibility. But when the bell rang and children ran into the arms of their waiting parents, I walked home alone, dragging my bag and my dreams across dusty streets. Loneliness became my constant companion. I didn't complain because I thought maybe this was how life was meant to be. Yet deep inside I longed for love, simple love. The kind that held you when you cried, that said, "You matter," without demanding proof. I wished for someone to tell me I was enough. That desire grew like a quiet fire inside me, and I carried it into adulthood, hoping maybe, someday, someone would fill that hollow space in me. As I stepped into my 20s, the taunts didn't fade. They grew sharper. "You've graduated, but what's the use? You'll just waste your life at home." My family's words were heavy, and sometimes I felt like they were pressing me into the ground. Every conversation turned into a reminder of how I wasn't living up to expectations. They didn't see how hard it was to breathe under the weight of their disappointment. I remember nights when I would sit on the roof, staring at the stars, wondering if my father was somewhere looking at the same sky. I wondered if he would have defended me, if he would have told me not to give up. But the silence around me always answered. No one was coming, and no one ever had. The older I grew, the more I realized that people measured my worth through achievements I hadn't yet made. They didn't care about the storms inside me, the scars I carried, or the resilience I was trying to build. To them, I was just the girl with no father, no clear path, and no real future. I hated how much those words haunted me, but I also hated how powerless I felt to change them. There were days I'd lock myself in my room and write letters I'd never send, letters to the father I never knew, letters to the version of myself I wished I could be. In those letters, I poured out the love I never received and promised myself that one day, I would find happiness. But even as I wrote those promises, I felt the crushing truth. I didn't know if happiness was something made for me. By the time I was 25, I had learned to keep my head down, to work hard, and to hide my tears. On the outside, I seemed quiet and distant. On the inside, I was a storm of yearning. Every smile I gave was a mask, every laugh a shield. No one knew how much I was still that little girl searching for a hand to hold, still hoping that someone, somewhere, would choose me without hesitation. And so, as I stood at the edge of adulthood, I carried my broken beginning like a secret I could never put down. My father's absence, my family's harshness, the loneliness that defined my childhood, it all shaped me into someone who craved love more than anything else. But love, I would soon discover, was not the gift I thought it would be. It was a trial, a test, and at times, a cruel illusion that left me emptier than before. Getting my first job felt like stepping into a brand new world. After years of suffocating at home under the weight of taunts, I finally had a reason to leave the house every morning with purpose. The day I received my offer letter, I remember clutching it so tightly as if it were the golden key to a better life. For once, I could look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm moving forward. Walking into the office on my very first day, I was nervous but strangely excited. The polished glass walls, the hum of computers, the sight of people dressed neatly in their professional clothes. It all made me feel as though I had been transported into a place where I could finally prove myself. I thought maybe here people would see me for who I am and not the girl who grew up without a father or the one who was constantly scolded at home. In those early weeks, I poured myself into work. Every task, no matter how small, became a challenge I wanted to conquer. I stayed late, made sure my files were perfect, and tried to impress everyone with my dedication. I imagined going home one evening, handing my first paycheck to my family, and finally hearing a word of pride instead of disappointment. That dream kept me going through the long hours and sleepless nights. But the world of work was not as kind as I had hoped. My boss, a woman who carried herself with authority and perfection, seemed to notice every flaw in me. If I handed in a report, she would circle errors in red ink and say, "You need to do better." If I stayed late, she would glance at me and remark, "You're still too slow." At first, I thought her strictness was meant to shape me into someone stronger, and so I accepted her harsh words in silence. Yet as the months passed, the criticism didn't stop, it grew sharper. She scolded me in front of colleagues, pointed out my mistakes as if they defined me, and never once acknowledged my efforts. I tried to hold back my tears, telling myself this was the price of growth. But late at night, when the office was quiet and I sat staring at my screen under the buzzing fluorescent light, I felt the weight of her disapproval crushing me. Still, I didn't give up. I thought, if I just work harder, if I just push myself more, maybe she will see me differently. So I started arriving earlier than everyone else, leaving when the cleaners had already mopped the floors, and sacrificing weekends to meet impossible deadlines. My body ached, my eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I convinced myself it was worth it. Yet with every extra effort I made, her demands only grew. It was as though no matter how high I climbed, she moved the ladder a little further away. I began to question if I was good enough, if I even belonged there. But the thought of returning home in failure was unbearable. At least in the office I had a chance. At home I had nothing but accusations waiting for me. The loneliness inside me deepened. Surrounded by people all day, I still felt unseen. My colleagues chatted with each other, went out for lunch in groups, while I stayed at my desk pretending to be busy. I didn't know how to join their laughter, how to fit into their circles. My life became a routine. Wake up, go to work, stay late, return home exhausted, and repeat. Sometimes, when everyone had left the office and I was the only one sitting under the dim lights, I would glance at my reflection in the black screen of my computer. The girl staring back looked worn out, with dark circles under her eyes and a sadness that no amount of makeup could hide. I would whisper to her, "Just a little longer. Just hold on. This will pay off someday." But as the days turned into months, I began craving something more than just survival. I longed for someone to notice me, not as an employee who had to prove herself, but as a human being who needed kindness. I wanted someone to say, "You're doing well. I see you." That desire, quiet but persistent, started to grow inside me. It was in the middle of this exhaustion and emptiness that I became more vulnerable than ever. I was searching for validation, for affection, for anything that could soften the sharp edges of my life. I didn't realize then that my longing would soon lead me into a new chapter, one where love would appear unexpectedly, bringing warmth and tenderness I had never known, but also the deepest heartbreak I had yet to face. It happened slowly, almost so quietly that I didn't notice at first. The same woman who had once seemed so sharp and impossible to please began to soften around me. I remember the first time she asked me, in a tone that wasn't laced with criticism, "Have you eaten today?" For a moment I thought I misheard her. My boss, the one who circled my mistakes in red, was suddenly concerned about something as ordinary as my lunch. It became little things at first. She would pause at my desk before leaving and say, "Don't overwork yourself, you've done enough today." Her voice was still firm, but there was a layer of gentleness I had never heard before. When I stayed late, she sometimes lingered too, and we'd find ourselves alone in the office. The silence that used to press down on me felt lighter in her presence, as if the room itself shifted when it was just the two of us. One evening, when the clock had long passed dinner time and the city outside had gone quiet, She placed 2 steaming cups of coffee on my desk. "You look like you need this," she said, sliding one toward me. Our fingers brushed for the briefest second, and I felt a spark. Unexpected, soft, but undeniable. We started talking more after that. Not about work but about life. She told me little stories. How she struggled in her own early years, how she often felt misunderstood, how she had learned to be strong because no one else would be for her. I listened with a kind of hunger, realizing that behind her commanding presence was a woman who carried scars of her own. It made her human to me, and strangely, it made me feel less alone. One night, as we sat across from each other, surrounded by files and the hum of the air conditioner, she asked, "Why do you push yourself so hard?" I hesitated, then admitted, "Because if I don't, no one will ever see me. Home, I'm invisible. Here, at least I have a chance." Her eyes softened in a way I had never seen before. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was talking to my boss. I felt like I was talking to someone who truly saw me. Our closeness deepened in small, delicate steps. She would place her hand lightly on my shoulder when she walked past. She would lean closer than necessary to explain something, and I could feel the warmth of her breath near my skin. These gestures were innocent enough to anyone watching, but to me they were lifelines. Tiny confirmations that maybe, just maybe, I mattered. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining outside, a heavy monsoon rain that trapped us in the office long past midnight. I was gathering my things when she suddenly said, "Stay a little longer. The roads are flooded anyway." There was something in her voice, a pull I couldn't resist. We sat by the wide glass windows, watching the rain streak down in silver lines. "Do you ever feel like the world is too harsh?" I asked quietly. She turned her face toward me, her expression unreadable at first. Then, almost whispering, she said, "All the time. But sometimes you find someone who makes it bearable." Before I could process her words, she reached out and tucked a strand of wet hair behind my ear. My heart raced, my breath caught, and then, so softly it felt like a dream, her lips brushed against mine. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't demanding. It was tender, hesitant, like a secret shared between 2 wounded souls. That first kiss unraveled something inside me. All the loneliness I had buried, all the longing I had carried since childhood, poured out in the way I leaned into her. She kissed me again, deeper this time, her hands gently holding my face as though I was something fragile, something precious. For the first time in my life, I felt cherished. After that night, everything between us shifted. The office, once just a place of deadlines and files, became the background of our quiet romance. She would call me into her cabin under the pretense of work, but our conversations often drifted into laughter and stolen glances. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would lean close, press a kiss to my cheek and whisper, "You're doing so well." Those moments were intoxicating. I walked into work each morning with a secret smile, carrying the warmth of her affection like armor against the world. She wasn't just my boss anymore. She became the first person who made me believe I was worthy of love. At night, I would lie in bed and replay everything in my mind. The way her eyes softened when she looked at me, the way her hand lingered on mine, the way she spoke my name like it mattered. I started to dream of a future where I wouldn't have to hide us, where she and I could be together without fear. In my imagination, she was the one who would finally erase the emptiness of my past. I had always thought love was something distant, something meant for other people, not for someone like me who had grown up with nothing. But here it was, unfolding right in front of me. I told myself, finally someone loves me. I didn't notice then how fragile it all was, how easily love can turn into illusion. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was seen, I was wanted, and I was held. And for a girl who had only ever known loneliness, that was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, my life was finally settling into something beautiful. For a while, I lived in the glow of what I thought was love. Every glance from her, every secret kiss stolen in the shadows of the office, felt like proof that my life had finally found meaning. I walked lighter, smiled more easily, and for the first time, dared to imagine tomorrow. But happiness, I've learned, often carries the scent of something waiting to be broken. It began with small cracks I tried not to notice. A sudden distance in her eyes when her phone buzzed. The way she excused herself to take calls in the hallway. Her voice lowered to a softness I had never heard directed at me. At first I told myself it was just work, she was important, she had responsibilities. Yet, each time I saw her retreat into secrecy, unease spread through me like smoke. One evening, as I sat at my desk pretending to finish a report, she left in a rush. She told me she had a meeting, but her tone was clipped, defensive. Something in me stirred. An ache, a suspicion I didn't want but couldn't silence. Against my better judgment, I followed her. The city was alive with lights and traffic, but all I could focus on was the trail of her car ahead of me. My heart pounded, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. A part of me prayed I was wrong, that I would find her walking into a client's office or meeting a colleague. But deep down, I already knew the truth was going to hurt. She stopped outside a quiet restaurant, the kind of place couples chose for privacy. I parked a distance away, my breath shallow as I watched her step inside. Minutes felt like hours until I saw her again. Only she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was a woman I had never seen before, elegant and confident, with an ease in her smile that made my stomach twist. They weren't discussing work. I could tell by the way my boss leaned forward, her eyes soft, her hand briefly brushing the other woman's fingers on the table. My chest constricted, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. That tenderness, the same tenderness I thought was mine alone, she was giving it to someone else. I wanted to turn away, to run, to spare myself the pain of watching, but my body refused to move. When the other woman reached out and touched her cheek, something inside me shattered. The rain from that night we first kissed, the whispered promises, the warmth that kept me alive, it all collapsed into a cruel performance. Tears blurred my vision as I finally stepped inside the restaurant. My legs felt like they were carrying me into fire, but I couldn't stop. She looked up, startled, her lips parting as if to explain. But the silence between us screamed louder than any excuse she could offer. "Who is she?" My voice cracked, trembling with anger and grief. The other woman looked at me, confused, but I didn't care about her. My eyes were locked on the woman I had trusted with my heart. She stood quickly, reaching for me, but I pulled back. "It's not what you think," she began, but the words felt rehearsed, meaningless. "Not what I think," I whispered bitterly. "Do you even know what I've given up for you? Do you know how much of myself I poured into believing you loved me?" My tears fell freely now, each one burning as it left my eyes. The restaurant had grown quiet, people staring, but I no longer cared about shame. All I cared about was the weight of betrayal crushing me from the inside out. She tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away as though her touch might poison me. "You made me believe," I said, my voice breaking, "that I was finally enough for someone, that I wasn't invisible anymore. And all this time, you were still with her." Her silence was answer enough. The other woman shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of what she had walked into. But I couldn't stay there another second. My chest was tight, my heart tearing itself apart, and I stumbled out of the restaurant, gasping for air as though the world itself was closing in on me. I don't remember how I drove home that night. My hands shook so violently I could barely keep the car steady. Every memory replayed in my mind like a cruel film reel. The first coffee she gave me, the gentle way she kissed me in the rain, the promises she never said but I believed anyway. All of it was poison now. The next morning, I walked into the office not as the woman who loved her, but as someone hollowed out by betrayal. I didn't wait for explanations. I packed my things, ignoring the curious glances of my colleagues. She came to my cabin, eyes pleading, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly. "You don't get to play with my heart. Not again." And with that I walked out. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed deep in my chest. My career, my fragile happiness, the piece of myself I had given away. It all ended in that moment. I felt used, discarded, and more broken than I had ever been before. For days, I cried until my body had no tears left. Betrayal has a way of tearing through you like fire, leaving behind only ash. And as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I realized the cruelest part wasn't that she had lied to me. It was that, for a brief moment, I truly believed she loved me, and that belief had been the most dangerous illusion of all. After the devastation of leaving that job, I felt like a ghost moving through the days. I would wake up, stare at the ceiling, and wonder why life seemed determined to break me at every turn. Yet survival has a way of pushing you forward even when your heart begs you to stop. Bills piled up, responsibilities didn't disappear, and so, against the weight of my grief, I forced myself to find another job. Walking into the new company felt different. The office was brighter, the atmosphere lighter, and people smiled at me as if I actually belonged there. I told myself this was a chance to rebuild, a chance to start over without carrying the shadows of my past. I tried to leave my heartbreak behind, but scars are stubborn things. They linger, hidden just beneath the surface. It was in this new place that I met him, my new boss. A man who, at first glance, seemed the opposite of what I had just escaped. He was kind, approachable, with a warmth in his eyes that felt disarming. He didn't tower over me with authority the way she had. Instead, he leaned down to my level, asking, "How are you settling in? Do you need any help?" It felt strange to have someone in power treat me like a person instead of a machine. Weeks passed, and his support grew more personal. He noticed when I looked tired and would say softly, "You've done enough for today, go home and rest." When I struggled with a project, he stayed late with me, patiently guiding me through the details. I couldn't help but compare him to the woman who had broken me. His kindness felt safe, his presence steady. Slowly, against my better judgment, I began to trust him. One evening, after a particularly long day, he offered to drive me home. I hesitated but accepted, too exhausted to refuse. In the car we talked, not about work but about life. He told me about his dreams, his struggles, and even confessed how lonely leadership could feel. For the first time, I saw him not just as a boss but as a man carrying his own burdens. That night marked the beginning of something I didn't expect. He started seeking me out, inviting me for coffee breaks, making me laugh with small jokes during meetings. There were moments when his hand would brush against mine as he passed me a file, lingering just long enough to send a quiet shiver through me. And one evening, as he dropped me off at my home again, he leaned closer, his lips brushing against my cheek in a tender kiss. I froze, heart racing, but when I looked at him, he smiled gently as if to say, "You're safe with me." It had been so long since I felt cherished, and though fear whispered in my ear, hope shouted louder. Our relationship unfolded quietly, carefully. He would call me late at night, his voice soft as he asked if I had eaten, if I was okay. At the office, we kept things professional, but outside, we allowed ourselves the luxury of stolen moments. I still remember the first time he kissed me fully, standing under the dim glow of a streetlight after dinner. His lips were warm, his touch steady, and for once, I didn't feel like I was being used. I felt wanted. Days turned into weeks, and I let myself dream again. I imagined walking down the aisle with him, building a home together, finally having a family of my own. He spoke of the future too, of vacations we might take, of a life we could share. His words wrapped around me like a blanket, and I let myself believe. But love, at least for me, has always been a fragile thing. When the talk of marriage finally surfaced, his warmth began to falter. At first it was small hesitations. "We should wait a little longer," or "My family is very traditional, it might take time." I brushed off the doubts, thinking every couple faces obstacles. But soon his excuses grew heavier. "They won't accept you. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. It's not the right time." The final blow came one evening when I asked directly, "Are we ever going to marry, or have I been fooling myself all this time?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I can't," he whispered. "My family will never agree. I'm sorry." Sorry. The words sliced through me like glass. Sorry couldn't mend the nights I had trusted him with my heart. Sorry couldn't erase the kisses, the promises, the fragile hope I had nurtured inside me. Sorry was a grave I hadn't asked to dig, but one I found myself buried in again. I walked away from him that night with my heart in pieces, heavier than it had ever been before. The betrayal wasn't loud or scandalous like the first time. It was quieter, colder. It was the betrayal of someone who looked me in the eye and chose cowardice over love. At work, I avoided him as best as I could, burying myself in tasks, refusing to let my tears show. But at home I collapsed. I cried until I was hoarse, asking myself why the world seemed to find new ways to break me each time I dared to love. Was I cursed? Or was I simply foolish for believing again and again that someone could truly stay? The answer didn't come, only silence. And in that silence, I felt the familiar echo of abandonment, the same emptiness I had known since childhood. For the second time I had given everything and been left with nothing. After I walked away from him, I didn't just leave a man behind. I left another illusion shattered at my feet. The office, once a place that gave me purpose, now felt like a prison. His presence lingered in every corner, every memory echoing inside me until I couldn't breathe. So I did what I always did when my world collapsed. I went back to the only place I could call home. But home had never truly felt like home. The moment I stepped through the door, I was reminded of it. My mother's eyes scanned me from head to toe, not with warmth but with disapproval. "You look thinner," she muttered, as if my grief was a personal failure. My siblings barely looked up, too busy in their own worlds, and the silence that followed was louder than any welcome could have been. I placed my bag down in my old room, the walls still carrying the faint memories of a childhood I never really had. Growing up fatherless had left me with a wound I could never close. It wasn't just about missing a man in the house. It was the absence of protection, of belonging. It was the endless whispers from relatives, the pity in neighbors' eyes, the taunts from my own family who never let me forget that my life was somehow less without him. That night, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, and the weight of everything pressed down on me. My failed relationships, the betrayal, the coldness at home. It all layered together until I felt suffocated. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I didn't bother wiping them. No one here would notice, and even if they did, they would only shake their heads, call me dramatic, and remind me that life is hard for everyone. In the days that followed, their taunts returned as naturally as breathing. My mother would sigh loudly when she saw me, muttering about how all I did was bring shame or waste time. My siblings teased me for quitting yet another job, mocking my inability to handle life. I wanted to scream that they didn't know the storms I had weathered, the loneliness I carried, the way I had been broken and rebuilt only to be broken again. But I stayed silent. Arguing only gave them more ammunition. Every dinner felt like a battlefield. They spoke about their successes, their plans, while I sat quietly, the outsider in my own family. No one asked how I was. No one cared about the cracks in my heart. It was as though my pain was invisible, or worse, inconvenient. And yet, the cruelest part was the longing that still lived inside me. Even after all the coldness, all the rejection, some part of me still yearned for them to see me, to hold me, to say, "You're not alone." But that love never came. I was a guest in their lives, not a daughter or a sister who belonged. On the third night back, I found myself standing in front of the old photo of my father. His eyes looked kind in the picture, almost gentle, and I wondered if my life would have been different if he had been there to shield me. Would I still have fallen into the arms of people who only wanted pieces of me? Would I still ache this much for belonging? I pressed my hand against the frame, whispering, "Why did you have to leave me so soon?" My voice cracked, and the tears came again, angrier this time. It wasn't fair. I had been carrying this emptiness my entire life, and every heartbreak only made it heavier. Without him, I felt like I had been walking this world barefoot, stepping on shards no one else could see. Family or strangers. At this point I couldn't tell the difference. Both treated me with indifference. Both left me standing alone in the dark. And the realization hurt more than anything else. I didn't belong here, not in this house, not in the arms of those I once trusted, not even in the world that kept demanding more than I had to give. So I sat in my room, curled against myself, and promised that if no one else could love me, then I would. Even if it felt hollow, even if it felt forced, I had to. Because if I didn't, no one else ever would. Took me a long time to crawl out of the darkness. For weeks, I carried my heartbreak like a shadow, heavy and unrelenting. But one morning, as I sat in front of the mirror, I caught sight of my own tired face. My eyes looked dull, my lips curved downward, but somewhere deep inside, a small whisper rose. If no one else will love you, then you must love yourself. The thought startled me at first. Love myself. I had spent years chasing validation, begging for scraps of affection, bending myself to fit into others' lives. Loving myself felt foreign, almost impossible. And yet, it was the only path left unbroken. So I began slowly. One afternoon I walked into a small cafe near my street. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warm chatter of strangers wrapped around me like a blanket. I ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, watching the world move outside. At first I felt awkward, like everyone was staring at me sitting alone. But then, as I sipped from the warm cup, I realized no one cared. The world went on, indifferent, and for once that gave me peace. That moment, quiet, simple, mine, felt like the first breath after drowning. I started taking myself on little dates. I'd go to the park in the evening and sit beneath the old banyan tree, letting the cool wind kiss my cheeks. I began buying flowers for myself. Small bunches of daisies or roses from the street vendor. I would place them in a glass on my table, and every time I looked at them I smiled. They were my gift to me, proof that I didn't need someone else to make life beautiful. The mirror, once my harshest critic, became my confidant. Instead of frowning at the scars of exhaustion, I began to notice the strength in my eyes, the resilience in my smile. I whispered little affirmations to myself. You are enough. You've survived storms that would have broken others. You deserve gentleness, even from yourself. Slowly, those whispers became truths I believed. My routines changed too. I cooked meals I enjoyed, even if no one else joined me at the table. I put on music while cleaning my room, letting my body sway to melodies I once reserved for someone else's company. I lit candles at night and read books until my heart felt light. Piece by piece, I stitched together a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. And in those quiet moments, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. I no longer feared being alone. In fact, I started cherishing it. The silence that once suffocated me now became a sanctuary. It was in that silence I could hear my own heartbeat, my own laughter, my own dreams calling me back. I realized I had been running from myself for so long, but here I was, finally coming home. I thought back to all the times I had whispered to others, "Please don't leave me." And now I whispered to myself, "I will never leave you." The betrayals still hurt, of course. Some nights, the memories of broken promises returned and made my chest ache. But instead of letting them consume me, I reminded myself of the lesson they brought. No one can love me more purely, more faithfully, than I can. Every person I had leaned on had let me fall. Now I was learning to stand on my own. One evening, as I sat at my favorite cafe with a cup of tea and a notebook, I wrote down the words that had been forming in my heart. The only true love is self-love. And for the first time I didn't just write it, I believed it. Life didn't suddenly transform into a fairy tale after I learned to love myself. The scars remained, etched deep within me, reminders of betrayal, loneliness, and loss. But instead of hiding them, I began to carry them like badges of survival. They told my story, and I no longer felt ashamed of it. I understood now that people would always come and go. Some would hold my hand for a while. Others would let it slip the moment it became inconvenient. Promises would be made, and promises would be broken. But the one presence that never abandoned me was the girl staring back in the mirror. My job wasn't glamorous, nor did it bring riches or admiration. But it gave me just enough to stand on my own 2 feet, to buy my flowers, to sip my coffee on solo dates, and to live quietly on my own terms. That, to me, was perfection in its own way. Sometimes I still felt the ache of everything I had lost, the father I never had, the love that slipped away, the acceptance I yearned for from my family. The pain would rise like an old song, soft and haunting. Yet now I didn't collapse under it. I let it wash over me, knowing it would pass, knowing I had the strength to remain standing. One evening, as I walked home under the fading light of sunset, the world around me seemed both vast and silent. Couples laughed together on sidewalks, families gathered at food stalls, but I moved alone through the crowd. And for once, I didn't feel incomplete. My solitude was not a curse. It was a truth I had learned to embrace. I whispered to myself as if sealing a promise into the air. I may walk alone, but I am not broken. And in that moment I knew. I wasn't searching anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone else to complete me. I had already found the one person who would never leave my side. Myself. With that realization, I stepped forward into the night, not fearless but unshakable.